Welcome back to Careers Explained. This week, we're talking to Angelina Darrisaw about her career path and current role as founder and CEO of C-Suite Coach. Welcome, Angelina, and thank you for coming on today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Could you give me a brief overview of the major stepping stones that you've had on your path to your current role?
Yeah. So right now I run my own company. I've been doing that for going on 8 years. And it's been quite a journey. And some days I'm still just shocked that I haven't had a corporate paycheck in that long. But before that, I guess it all started at Davidson. That's what I would say. I was a liberal arts major, poli-sci major at Davidson, and I got internships. I'm originally from New York City. I had internships at New York companies in the media industry every summer. So that's what I did with my summers. First, I think at Bloomberg was the first one, then HBO, then Fisher Price, then ESPN. So every summer I was doing an internship, and it boiled down to some hard decisions, even when I was in college, of what path I wanted to take. I remember the summer before my senior year, I had two offers, an ESPN internship, but then also a poli-sci program that I was really interested in Rwanda. And that was a hard choice for me because I love learning. I love being a part of, academic studies and all of that. But I knew that I also ultimately wanted to go into business, so needed that business background. So that being said, I ultimately chose the internship, and I'm glad I did because it helped me get my first job at ESPN after I graduated with my master's from Wake Forest. So those relationships that I kept up with helped me get my first job, and actually was able to go to Rwanda years later in 2019 on a business trip. So it all works out. So I would say that's, really the first thing is thinking about internships early on. Second thing would be keeping up relationships. As I mentioned, I got my first role at ESPN from just keeping up with the people that I'd met when I interned at ESPN. And I had interned in 2008. I didn't start working there until 2010. So it was 2 years of keeping up relationships while I was in grad school and everything else. After I started at ESPN as a sales and marketing associate, knew that I wanted to put into use some of the quant work and analytical skills that I had learned in my master's program. So shadowed a bunch of people and ultimately found a role that seemed like a better fit for me, which was a business analyst role. I applied for the first role when it became open, and I didn't get it. And my biggest point here for folks is when you don't get things, accept it gracefully. Sometimes usually it's never personal, or it might just not be the right fit at the right moment, but how you respond when you don't get an opportunity really goes a long way with people, because just a couple months later, another opportunity came up on that same team, and they were so impressed with me still, even though I didn't get that role. And I ultimately ended up getting the next role that came up just a couple months later. So always love to just weave that in there. It was great. I worked on really cool things. Media technology was in a very different place back then. So we were still at early stages of streaming. And that's a lot of what I got to work on, which was really cool. I decided I wanted to go even more like techie. And I found a role at Viacom, which I don't even know what they're called now. They've been bought and sold and bought, so many and merged. I think now it's Paramount CBS, but at the time it was Viacom. And they had networks like MTV, VH1, Comedy Central, BET, so on. I worked in the corporate part. So I didn't work within a company like that, you have the opportunity to work for the different networks, or you could work for the corporate brand. And so I was looking at doing company-wide deals in the tech space. So clients would include a Snapchat, a Twitter, again, very nascent in technology back then. Now, of course, way more mainstream. And so I was a manager there. I ultimately got promoted after my first year, which was amazing, and became a senior manager, and used that role to get more opportunities. We had a tuition reimbursement program where you could take courses to deepen your knowledge and your expertise and contribute better. So I took a range of courses. I took some that were focused on digital media, digital analytics, and then I also took some around coaching, ultimately getting a full certificate in coaching at NYU while I was working full-time at Viacom. So all of that happened in a course of a quick couple years. And by the time I would say it was 2015, the start of that year, I'd pretty much made the decision that I was going to leave the company. And I ultimately did in July of 2015. I actually had resigned a bit earlier, but the company was going through a bunch of layoffs at the time, and I didn't get laid off, and they really needed talent to close the gap. So one of the other things I did is I was okay staying on longer, and that helped with the relationship of the people I had at Viacom, which I don't know if you're hearing a thread or a theme, but relationships are really important. And those relationships, some of them I still have today because of how I exited, right? So exiting gracefully, exiting on good terms was really helpful in that. And then 2015 came, finally left Viacom, started my company in August of 2015. So that was a lot.
Wow, thank you so much for walking us through that. And I really love how you're highlighting relationships throughout. It does seem to be a common theme. Maybe could you talk a little bit about these different roles, how you've learned what you did and didn't want in a job in all of these different spaces and spheres, especially related to media and then coaching?
Yeah. How did I learn what I did and didn't want? So I know exactly what I'm motivated by early in my career because I grew up without all of the resources that I wanted to have growing up. And so for me, making sure that I was financially stable and secure was a huge motivator. And I based a lot of my decisions early in my career, partly on that. Of course, I made sure that I, had passion for what I did, but I wanted to keep that at the front, right? And at the forefront. Let me take jobs that will lead me to the financial freedom and stability that I desired. And so I say that to say, when I look at things, I always I look at things very critically, strategically, analytically. That's my gift, my skill set. And when I started as a sales and marketing associate at ESPN, I was looking around like, what are the entry level positions? What's the next step? How long does it take for people to get promoted? Do I have a higher chance of getting promoted if I'm in this realm, or a higher chance if I go to this department? And I've spent a lot of time, like all my lunches, my breakfast meetings, my coffees, doing informational interviews with folks. So informational interviews are just, can I have 20 minutes of your time to, catch up, learn about what you do, and coffee with no intention of a next step, but just to learn. And I would have notebooks full of notes. And so that helped me learn, one, about a whole breadth of roles throughout the company, which was really just informative and ultimately made me better at my job because I just knew more. And then it helped me see, okay, if I do this path, yes, there's exceptions, but generally people aren't getting promoted for like 4 years. That would mean I would be at the same salary or, maybe little bumps, but roughly in the same area for however many years. I don't want that. I'm looking over here. One, their starting salary is much higher and the promotions are happening quicker. So I always like to call that out because when I was at ESPN, and I did have some fun perks, of course, like I got tickets, I went to fun parties. I did have some of those fun perks, but I also spent a lot of times. When I was in an analyst role, I was doing projections for the company. I was analyzing reports that came from big consulting firms about the state of our industry and, doing briefs for our sales teams about that. And that meant that sometimes I was in the office working in spreadsheets until midnight, 1 a.m. during forecast season. And so a lot of times people are like, oh, you work in media. Like, one, they think maybe you're front facing, or two, that you're just living this fun sports life. And I could have done that. A lot of folks who were on the marketing side, especially events marketing, got to go to all the events like ESPYs and everything else. But instead of going to ESPYs, I was like, I'd rather just be paid a bit more. And usually the more you know about how a company works, the easier it is for you to help the company make money, which means the easier it is for you to get a higher salary. So when I moved over from sales and marketing associate to business analyst, I got a huge salary bump. And that was important to me. So again, The less fun work, usually the work that no one wants to do, is the work that tends to be the higher paid work. And it's less glamorous often. And I like to call that out. I know we'll get to my company in a little bit too, but I run a business that has coaching as a part of our services. Ultimately, we're a consultancy, but coaching is one of our services. And so many people come to me and they want to be a coach, or they want to do speaking and all of that stuff. And I have to tell you, if I were to look at the revenue breakdown of my company, yes, we get a significant amount of revenue from coaching, but the biggest revenue comes from the operational pieces, the behind the scenes work that people don't really see. So that's really what's like, quote unquote, keeping the lights on and funding the company, is all of our operations work, which means a lot of hours in spreadsheets, a lot of analyst work, a lot of strategic work, and that's not front facing. So I just like to call that out, is that there's trade-offs. If it's really important to you to be front facing, know that it's not that it's impossible for that to be financially lucrative, but I think it is important to recognize that it's more, you're more looking at the exception than the rule, right? Whereas doing things around business strategy, around analyst work, consulting work, those sorts of pieces tend to have a little bit more, especially in media or in my business that I'm currently in, tend to have a lot more opportunity for financial growth. So that's how I made the first decision. When it came from moving from ESPN to Viacom, and I loved my team at ESPN. I loved working at ESPN. It was just the people for me more than anything else. It was really hard for me to decide if I should move on. But when I was chatting with Viacom and I got that role, again, another huge salary bump, which for me early in my career, hugely important. I had student loans to pay off. I had, my own rent. I had all these things I wanted to save for. So I needed to make sure that I had money in my pocket. So that was something that was definitely really important to me.
Thank you for being so vulnerable and sharing about that and the motivation there. That's really important. I feel like a lot of people don't talk about the difference between the glamour on the front end facing and then behind the scenes kind of spreadsheet works. Can we move on to your current role? Would you mind describing or giving an overview about your company and your role there?
Yes, sure. So my company is called C-Suite Coach. We're a consultancy that really focuses on building more inclusive teams and creating better leaders. And we do this with three core services. We have coaching, where we staff coaches to do one-to-one executive coaching, group coaching, or coaching and other team coaching. And they work with large companies in order to do that. So we're what's called a B2B company, business to business, meaning that very rarely are we working with individuals. That's not our client base. That's not our business model. Happy to talk more about what I learned about that as well. But on occasion, we will work with individuals. It's just very, very rare. And ultimately, although we're working with big companies, it is people that are the recipients of the work. So we do get to touch people in that way, which is great. We also offer operational support for programs. So we design leadership programs, we design diversity focused programs, community focused programs. We support them in a number of capacities, from storytelling, data collection, to designing KPIs, marketing support. So that's really, again, a big chunk of the business. And it all goes back to that same theme and mission of building better leaders and creating more inclusion in the workplace. And then lastly is training and development. So building offsites for teams to help them collaborate better, doing trainings to help upskill folks within an organization. All of that falls within that realm.
I know you probably have a variety or various different responsibilities, but maybe walking through what a typical week might look like for you. I think a day might vary a little too much.
Yeah. Let me help you all get a sense of the scale of my company.
Okay.
We have about, I think the last count was 55, so over 50 people that are on payroll on a monthly basis. So what do I mean by that? Some are full-time employees, which means they're salaried with benefits. Yeah, some are contractors, which means that they work with us on certain projects. But I think it's important to call that out because what it means is I'm dealing with a lot of people on a day-to-day to make everything work. And when you're dealing with people, it creates a whole nother workflow. Like think about a big company. My company's a small company, but think about a big company. Usually human resources is its own arm because dealing with people is such a task. So I will say I spend some of my time in meetings with my actual contractors, employees, folks that make the company work. And that could be a range of things from if they're full-time employees, performance conversations, benefits conversations. If they're contractors, it could be, are they meeting their requirements to keep working with us? What negotiating rates, all of that kind of stuff, hearing from other contractors that want to pitch services to us. And then where I want and try to spend the bulk of my time is client facing work. So I think I didn't answer your question before, like, what do you do for the company? So my role in the company really is focusing on business development and right now operations, trying to offload the operations part because my core skill set really is business development. So I think, again, when you think about your role in a company and who you want to be in a company, it's important to think about what is my skill set? What do I bring? What do I do best? And how can I find a way to spend the most time possible using my superpower? So again, we're actively hiring to try to offload some things that are on my plate that shouldn't be, so that I can spend more and more time client facing and building those relationships. Here we go again, that will help us drive more business. So I think that pretty much covers what a day week is. The other thing I will say is I do facilitate for the company. So I don't coach for the company. We have over 40 coaches that work with us. I don't need to do any coaching for the company, nor again, is it the best use of my CEO time, but occasionally I will facilitate for clients that want facilitation as a part of the deal. And sometimes because of my own personal brand, they'll want me specifically instead of one of our facilitators for the company. So depending on the relationship, I may also be facilitating a lot throughout the week. Looking at this week, for example, I have a number of lives and presentations where I am doing front-facing work for clients.
I love the way that you really talked about identifying your superpower. Maybe we can move on to some advice.
And I would say my best advice for anyone is don't try to follow someone else's path, like create your own path, because everything is changing, right? Folks will reach out to me now. I have been out of the media industry for 8 years, and they'll ask me about jobs and applications at ESPN. And I'm like, people aren't even there anymore that were there. The way they're doing business is different. Like I mentioned, I say that to say the state of business, the state of technology is changing so quickly that the skill sets that I needed when I started early on might be a very different skill set than you need today. So it's important for you to hear people's stories and use that as nuggets of information to help inform your journey and take away those tangible themes that might work for you. So for example, in this conversation, I called out themes like building relationships, doing informational interviews. Those are universal things that pretty much anyone can benefit from. But I would never say, go to this program, do this thing, then make sure you do this and then get promoted this time. It's never going to work that way, right? So it is a matter of one, recognizing that you are creating your own path, which can be really scary because, I feel we are in a society where you go to elementary school, you graduate, then you go to what's the next one? Junior high school, you graduate, high school, college, grad school, et cetera. And so when you're in the workforce, it's kind of like, well, what's the next step? How do I plan this? Prior to this, my whole life was planned for me. And so this is the scary part, but it's also the fun part because it's like if you've ever had to do a speech and you're worried about your words and if you're going to mess it up, people will tell you they don't know the script. You know the script. So it doesn't matter if you mess up. And I think that's how you should approach your career. No one knows the script. So if you make a choice and it turns out not to be the right choice for you, guess what? like you can change it, you can keep moving forward, you're still creating your own path. So I will say that, but I know you probably also want some actionable things or tangible pieces. I'd also say, I talked about relationships a lot and what that looks like to build that. um, Again, we're in such a different world. 10 years ago, social media was really barely existing when I started. And so we talked about themes like brand and social media. Social media right now is going through an evolution, right? Like, who knows what's happening with Twitter, the bird, Meta's changing up things. Like, we're about to see another evolution. So I would just say dive in early. Like when I was in grad school, we were on Twitter, even though we didn't know what it was, just to learn about it. And that made me, for example, valuable at my company when they were like, we need to put new young people on the digital stuff, right? So find what's emerging, whether it's, I don't know, what are y'all on now? Discord. I don't know what else is out there, but, and that also for me, I was an adjunct professor at NYU for a bit. Being a professor was really good because I got to hear from young people what was emerging and it kept me fresh. So I'd also say, as a younger, more junior person, think about how you can inform the more seasoned people in your life. Because if you're adding value to them, like you're telling them things that they may not know about, then they're going to want to spend more time with you, which ultimately benefits you and your career. So use that as your competitive advantage. But yeah, just know that we're constantly going through an evolution, and the only way to stay competitive in that is to lean in it, try to learn as much about it as possible, download the apps that folks are talking about, read the industry articles so you can be in the know, and that way you can be a part of the evolution versus being left behind in the evolution.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. And I'm so thankful for you coming on to Careers Explained.